Oh, hey, live. Nice. Quick. All right, so hello, ladies and gentlemen. Um, Normally I wouldn't be streaming at 12 o'clock my time, but I found something. I found something very interesting. I should clarify first that I have another stream in the works that I'm planning to do. Uh, I'm planning to review a paper by a guy named Stephen D. Brookfield. It's called Foundations of Critical Theory. He seems to be very well read on the subject, and so I'm trusting that this paper that he's written is a good intro to critical theory. But until I get to that, I was actually sent this link, this very, very interesting link to an article by my mom, of all people, because she knows I'm interested in this kind of garbage, but it's genuinely one of the best articles ever for a couple of reasons I'll get into once I start the stream proper. But this stuff is absolute gold. So let me just get the name of the article. The name of the article is referenced in whatchamacallit, the title of this stream. But before I start to screen, okay, here we go. Yeah, so this comes from The Baffler, a site I've absolutely never heard of before. But the title of the article by this guy named John Gans is "The Forgotten Man" on Murray Rothbard, philosophical harbinger of Trump and the alt-right. And all right, I guess I'll start screen sharing at this point because you're gonna want to see this fucking picture that they use to friggin' yeah, look at this crap. Ain't that some shit? If you're familiar with Discord at all and you know some of the bots that alter pictures, this looks like the dot eyes red bullcrap that some of the bots use, but it's actually worse. If any of you are on True Deal Tom's Discord, my picture of Hoppa my picture is Hoppa with eyes red, and it's fucking better than this shit. But I like it. It's eerie. It looks like they just photoshopped in bad red eye. And yes, this is fucking chat up in the corner if anyone ever shows up, but most people don't, which is fine. They can watch it later because this shit in this article isn't going anywhere. And balls. But yeah, that's Dr. Lehman's Q&A stream in the background over there. But enough of that. Just keep that active while I'm on here. All right. So let's get into this article. I haven't read the whole thing. Just a bit of the intro just to get an idea because it's a long fucking article, but it's so worth going through. John Maynard Keynes, towards the end of his 1936 The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, wrote, "The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. Madmen in authority, who hear voices in the air, are distilling their frenzy from some academic scribbler of a few years back." And, they're quoting Keynes because they know Murray's an Austrian, so we can tell where this is going real fast. "This is not a theory of history likely to find many supporters today. Events seem to most people more probably to be governed by great social forces like globalization, or the largely unconscious predilections of the social classes, or the rapacious designs of self-interested few. And surely one would imagine there's no less philosophical figure than the current president." I don't know about that. I don't think anybody considers Trump to be a major philosopher. They just consider him to be a controversial political figure. But anyway, "Trump, who it seems has never cracked a book, must distill his own frenzy and pull his ideas not from the air, but from somewhere else entirely." I don't think people think that. You listen to the left, he's pulling his ideas from Hitler or some garbage, from Mussolini, whatever. Big shit. But anyway, "Trumpism, we are often told, represents the end." Oh, Trump is a centrist. Yes, Voltaire, Trump is a centrist. "Trumpism, we are often told, represents the end of conservatism as a movement, guided by ideas and intellectuals. This is supposed to be a revolt of what Inchel Menschkin once called the bourgeoisie." Ah, I see. Very funny. or the result of economic anxiety, to use a favorite euphemism. True, Trump may not be a man of ideas, but his presidency and political style were imagined by one man, the libertarian economist and philosopher Murray N. Rothbard, who died in 1995. Not long before his death, Rothbard rejoiced when he saw in the emergence of David Duke and Pat Buchanan in 1992 his long-held vision for America's right, and concluded that what was needed was more of the same. And here's a quote not too many people, especially not too many ANCAPs and libertarians, are fond of. And this is from Murray. This is from his later works in his writing for like his newsletters, but this is definitely him. And so the proper strategy for the right wing must be what we call right-wing populism. Exciting, dynamic, tough, and confrontational, rousing and inspiring not only to the exploited masses, but the often shell-shocked right-wing intellectual cadre as well. And in this era where the intellectual and media elites are all establishment liberal conservatives, all in a deep sense one variety or another of social democrat, all bitterly hostile to the genuine right, we need a dynamic, charismatic leader who has the ability to short-circuit the media elites and to reach and rouse the masses directly. We need a leadership that can reach the masses and cut through the crippling and distorting hermeneutical fog spread by the media elites. The media elites. Somebody get me some parentheses real quick. But yeah, no, this is Rothbard. Rothbard predicted Trump. This, I think, to most people, this isn't too much news if you know who Rothbard is or if you're familiar with it. But no, for some people, this is shell shock. Rothbard later regretted pandering to Pat Buchanan. Is that true, Voltaire? I don't know if that is true, Voltaire. I require a source, my dude. But I don't know. Maybe he regretted pandering to Pat Buchanan, but I've never heard anything about him regretting his endorsement of David Duke, which I think is the far more damning of the two things. So, whatchamacallit? Continue. Despite the eerie accuracy of his vision, Rothbard's name is not widely known. And his prolific writing on every subject from contemporary cinema to the Federal Reserve, Rothbard's name is not widely known. It's not likely to be found in a bibliography of contemporary economist papers, but you will find it scrawled on the seamy underbelly of the web in the message boards of the alt-right, where fewer voices are more in the air than Rothbard's. That's a lie. There are definitely more people that the alt-right talks about than Rothbard, for sure. I mean, Evola, Nietzsche, Jared Taylor, Richard Spencer, they're just more popular names than Rothbard's. I mean, you get into the real intellectual side of the alt-right and you might have something maybe, but normally I wouldn't say that this is the average person's experience in the alt-right. Although you get there eventually. One can look at the recent profiles of neo-fascists to find the name Rothbard, and that of his favorite pupil and protege, Hans Hermann Hoppe, again and again. Neo-fascists, ooh, what a spicy buzzword. In the New Yorker's piece on Mike Enoch, the founder of The Daily Show, a podcast, good stuff, Enoch notes that his path to the alt-right began with reading Rothbard, Ayn Rand, and Ludwig von Mises. When asked how he began to move so far right, Tony Hovetter, the Indiana Nazi from the infamous New York Times profile, name drops Murray Rothbard and Hans Hermann Hoppe. That's a direct quote from the article, by the way, which I thought was pretty funny. Chris Cantwell, the crying Nazi. Let's get this. The crying Nazi of Vice News notoriety. People make fun of him because he cried as he was getting arrested because, it was a shitty scenario for him. Nobody wants to do this, but, see how long any of these guys last with Cantwell in the fucking cage, see who's crying then. Either way, says he was a big fan of Murray Rothbard and then went to read Hans Hermann Hoppe's Democracy, the God That Failed. Yes, this best red pill. No, not red pill. There's only but one pill. There's the Hoppe pill. Take the Hoppe pill, ladies and gentlemen. Read Democracy, the God That Failed. Oh, shit, lost chat. Fuck, I keep doing that. I'm sorry. All right. Trump backer Peter Thiel's essay, The Education of a Libertarian, shows the clear... Excuse me, I keep losing my damn place. Shows the clear influence of Rothbard's apostle Hoppe, who invited Thiel to a conference that also hosted the American Renaissance's Jared Taylor and Vider's Peter Brunlow. Don't know who Peter Brunlow is. Brimlow? I'm not familiar with Vider, but I know Jared Taylor. Love Jared Taylor. For a time before his death, Rothbard had the ear of Pat Buchanan. Paul Gottfried, the erstwhile ally of Richard Spencer, who is sometimes credited with coining the term the alternative right, was a friend and admirer of Rothbard, and he also delivered the Murray and Rothbard Memorial Lectures at the Mises Institute. This is true. I don't actually know how close Gottfried is to Spencer, but yeah, Gottfried mentioned it sometime in like 2008, 2009, 2010, like first term Obama presidency before Spencer did. But I guess that would make sense. If Gottfried and Spencer were friends, that's where Spencer got it from. But yeah, what are you saying, Voltaire? Throughout his life, he pandered to a group who were against the status quo, including extreme leftists and right-wing populists. In other words, he chose shit political allies. Yeah, oh, well, Rothbard, yeah. That was only towards the beginning, though. Rothbard eventually took Mises's advice and realized that the shitlib left was the shitlib left. And, nothing was going to come of that. It was actually radical feminism that drove Rothbard away from even allying slightly with the left, which is what's pretty friggin' hysterical. But, continuing on. Inching more to the mainstream, Andrew Breitbart and Steve Bannon's fusion of libertarianism and populism seems Rothbardian in inspiration. Indeed, Justin Raimondo, Rothbard's disciple and the author of the biography Enemy of the State, The Life of Murray and Rothbard. It's funny, I've never heard of Raimondo up until this point. And I scrolled through the Mises Institute quite a while, but maybe I have to look elsewhere. Pronounced in February 2017, Bannonism is libertarianism. To an extent, possibly. A few days later, Bannon announced his fight for the deconstruction of the administrative state, a goal that would have garnered Rothbard's enthusiastic applause. Nota. Rothbard and Bannon apparently also both share an appreciation for Vladimir Lenin, a political sensei, but the latter's familiarity with the Russian revolutionaries' ideas might very well have come from the former's writings. I don't know what they're talking about too much here. I mean, in his later days, Rothbard was a pragmatist, so if he admired Lenin for such, I can't say I blame him, but I wouldn't necessarily... I don't know where this sensei thing is coming from. That's what's kind of throwing me for a loop. And no links either, so, have fun with that shit. The literature about Rothbard tends to be hagiographic at times. Almost literally so. I don't know what that word means, and I wanted to look it up on stream, so I'll get chat back in a bit. Copy. Paste. Hagiographic definition. Is a type of biography that puts the subject in a very flattering life. Oh. So they're sucking his dick, basically. That wouldn't surprise me all too much. Because the only people who know about Rothbard are the people who directly, spoke to him. So yeah, of course it's going to be a flattering light. Go find me a Keynesian willing to write a biography on Murray Rothbard, and then then you can complain. Is this the guy from Moreover Philosophy? Yes, I do stream with Tom and Ori and those guys on Moreover Philosophy. Hi, Ender Wiggin. Let's see, just to pick up. One biographer, right off the bat, compares him to St. Augustine and Soren Kierkegaard. I don't know who does this, but fuck Kierkegaard. And I don't know if I'd call Murray Rothbard St. Augustine either. That's certainly a stretch. Raimondo, sounding like something that might have been written in the 19th century about Beethoven or Goethe, is taken by the man's physiognomy. Okay. The high forehead, the nose prominent but finely formed, and the half-smile exuding an earnest intelligence. The Mises Institute, named for Rothbard's mentor, the Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises, which served as his intellectual home for many years. It's almost personality cult dedicated to the memory of Rothbard the Great. Its website is sprinkled with many fond reminiscences of his intellectual and personal virtues. Well, he founded the damn thing, so no shit. Damn, that is rude for Kierkegaard. Maybe I was a bit mean to Kierkegaard. I'm just not a big fan of existentialism. Nor am I a fan of his attempt to throw in Christian existentialism. I have fear and trembling somewhere around here, but I don't know. Maybe I was a bit mean to Kierkegaard, but yeah, the Mises Institute was founded by Rothbard. Rothbard's the founder of the modern liberty movement, and the Mises Institute is a libertarian think tank. Why are you surprised by all the dick sucking that's happening? Poisoning the well? Who, me? About Kierkegaard? Or the Mises Institute about Rothbard? Gotta be more specific, Voltaire. How did this Jewish libertarian from the Bronx, the child of immigrants from Eastern Europe, a self-professed anarchist or anarcho-capitalist in his chosen term, whose entire life was dedicated to destroying the state, end up... Oh, the article. Yeah, the article is doing a good bit of poisoning the well, but, you know, anybody who's not a libertarian or even, you know, outside the normie Overton window of the right is going to be poisoning the well to some extent, but we fight through it. We big brains. Was destroying. They end up on the reading list of so many would-be fascists. Well, one, because you use fascist as a slang term, so literally anybody to you can be a fascist, but that's not the point. The larger point is that, because Rothbard was a pragmatist towards the end of his life, and also he has a lot of cool critiques about democracy, which a lot of fascists, I'm sure, are pretty big fans of. But anyway, and how, as some of his followers protest, could any aspirant jackbooted thug be attracted to the thought of a man whose main contribution to the discourse, as far as they're concerned, is the non-aggression principle, where it is thought all political and ethical questions can be solved simply by reference to the axiom that one must never, ever violate the person or property of anyone else? Well, Hoppe kind of relates it pretty well to the non-aggression principle, but I don't know. Most people who you're talking about in this article have kind of abandoned the NAP as a reasonable starting axiom. I mean, I know a lot of people on Tom's Discord has. I know Tom has. He made the whole video about it, although I didn't necessarily agree with the way he went about doing it. But yeah, argumentation ethics isn't my cup of tea, really. Violence can only be initiated in self-defense. Well, with a man like Rothbard, the boundaries of the self tend to become mutable and expansive. Yeah. Marianne Rothbard, as it happens, was an only child. His father, David Rothbard, who emigrated from Poland, grew up speaking only Yiddish, but as Rothbard recounts with no small pride in reflections on his life, he completely lost his accent and spoke English fluently. Yeah, he spoke English pretty good. Good lectures on YouTube of him talking. He speaks very well. David also adopted what his son considered to be devotion to basic American way, minimal government, belief in a respect for free enterprise and private property, and a determination to rise by one's own merits and not via government privilege or handout. Well, good for Rothbard's dad. This is despite the fact that his family was situated in a deeply leftist milieu. He wrote near the end of his life in a short memoir for Chronicles, "I grew up in a communist culture. The middle-class Jews in New York whom I lived among, whether family, friends, or neighbors, were either communist or fellow travelers in the communist orbit. I had two sets of Communist Party uncles and aunts on both sides of the family." Wow. Rothbard fighting the influence. Respect. He knew how to defeat the Jewry because he was in on it. He could take him out from the inside. Everyone is a fascist except me. Yes, that is absolutely true. I am not a fascist. Everyone is a fascist except me. Even though I have a flag of a 1945 Francoist Spain. You'll never catch me in public with it, but I do. Jews? Communist? Impossible. Yes. Communist Jews. Who's heard of such a ridiculous thing? Except, when you look through all the party membership of the old Russian revolutionary class, and then the party membership of the government run by Lenin and then Stalin, and, some patterns start to emerge, but you can't talk about those patterns, Goy. That's anti-Semitic. If I start to sound too much like Chris Cantwell, someone stop me. He took his father's side in the frequent debates, and Rothbard recalls being 11 or 12 when he upset a family gathering by asking, "What's wrong with Franco anyway?" Oh my God. That's so good. Like I said, I hadn't read this whole article, but oh my God, I'm so happy I did. This thing is a fucking gold mine. Oh, so good. I'm so pleased right now. I like Franco. I like Franco. I like Rothbard so much more. While he looked up to and emulated his father's lone, dogged right-wing stand in the heart of the leftist Jewish New York, Rothbard did not think his mother, Raya Babushkin, assimilated as fully. He seems annoyed with what he perceived as his mother's continued connection to the old country, and he was particularly irked by her interest in Russian literature, which he viewed as dreamy escapism. Mommy issues. Go figure. In a breathless fan letter to Ayn Rand on the publication of Atlas Shrugged, in which he called the book the greatest novel ever written, he regretted that all those generations of novel readers, people like my mother, who in their youth read Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, searching eagerly for they knew not what truths which they never quite found, that these people could not read Atlas Shrugged. Here, I thought, were truths they were looking for. Well, Rand herself was a Russian immigrant, so I perhaps see the connection in what he's trying to get at. If you want to read Rand without reading fucking Atlas Shrugged or The Fountainhead and you want to save yourself the headache, you can go read Anthem, by the way. That's a very good short little pamphlet that lays out, I think, a lot of Rand's key beliefs. Given the middle name Newton by his scientist father, he followed his namesake's axiomatic lodestar, believing that by starting with a limited set of simple, clear rules, you could rationally derive everything else in reality. All right, now they're taking vague pot shots at praxeology here, but not to say I'm the hugest fan of it, but in some ways he was more like The Fountainhead is a better book. I'm sure it is. I'm just saying, if you don't have the time commitment to read something like The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged, because it does take a time commitment, Anthem is something you could sit down and read in 2 sittings because it's only like 130 pages or something. But to continue. But in some ways, he was more like a character out of his mother's beloved Dostoevsky novels, clever, voluble, possessed of his malicious wit, gregarious and generous to new friends at first, but then prone to bitter quarrels and falling outs, nurturing deep obsessive grievances and resentments, willing to go to extremes to follow the consequences of a pituitively consistent intellectual system of his own making, gleefully contrarian to the point of perversity, and above all, single-mindedly willing the destruction of the established order. That last part, right, where is it? Yeah, right here, I get. This, you can very much see this from reading Rothbard's literature, both young and old. But this part, right here, is what I'm needing some sources on, because the whole friends thing and falling out, I'm not too familiar with that. Granted, I'm sure the Mises Institute wouldn't publish crap like this because if it made Rothbard look bad, they wouldn't. But some links would help, my dude. Let's see. Anyone against Rothbard is... fuck me. Anyone against Rothbard is a collectivist, statist cuck. Yes. That is true. He had a falling out with Nozick. I don't think Rothbard was alive to witness Nozick's somewhat rise amongst intellectuals. But I think Voltaire, I think you're mistaken. I think it's Hoppe who has the issue with Nozick, but I don't think there was a falling out between the two. I just think Hoppe kind of despises Nozick for being a mainstream libertarian. Anybody who isn't extreme enough often gets kind of shat on, which is unfortunate because I'm sure I haven't read Anarchy, State, and Utopia, but I trust it makes some valuable contributions that, even some hard right-wing libertarians would be better off reading. But to continue, Pondering the strange authoritarian political fantasies of his declared partisan of absolute liberty, he particularly brings to mind Shigaliev, the theorist of Revolutionary Cell and Dostoevsky's Demons. My conclusion stands in direct contradiction to the idea from which I started. Proceeding from unlimited freedom, I end with unlimited despotism. Wow, that is that's an interesting summary, an interesting comparison. I've never read Dostoevsky, never touched anything by him except maybe when I was in high school. You know, we read parts of the Brothers Karamazov, I think. I think I want to say that's what it was. I can't remember though. But this is an eerily accurate description of Murray's political philosophy, indeed. In one of the lectures about Rothbard, they mentioned Rothbard having arguments, and I was like, oh, okay. I'm going to trust you on this, Voltaire, but if that's the case, then that's kind of funny. Yeah, I could see Rothbard lashing out at... I could imagine Rothbard kind of shitposting like, Nozick, you're just a normie basic bitch libertarian. Rothbard fucking becoming the libertarian fascist before it was even cool. Before that guy, T. Precocious and outspoken, Rothbard was bullied in public school. Lol. So his parents put him in a private, especially given Jesus was Jewish. Hail our people, hail victory. Right on. So his parents put him in private Birch Wotton Lennox School in the Upper East Side. He thrived academically, but he resented the Park Avenue-bred limousine liberals among his peers and set up shop as class contrarian and the sole right-leaning voice. I soon became established as the school conservative, arguing strongly in the 8th grade against Roosevelt's introduction of the capital gains tax in 1938, and later against Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's left-wing policy of coddling criminals. Right on, Rothbard. He even wrote a critique of Nozick's anarchy state in Utopia. Did he? That would be something I'd be interested in reading. I'm sure the Mises Institute has it somewhere buried in their archives. I'll have to dig it up someday. He did make at least one friend, Lloyd Marcus, Roy Cohn's first cousin, whose father, Bernard K. Marcus, went to prison for fraud when his bank collapsed in 1930, contributing to the worsening of the financial crisis. Funny. Yeah, Rothbard being that kid in school isn't something that comes as much of a shock to me. I wasn't able to find any record of his immediate family suffering much from the Great Depression. Dealing with annoying communist family neighbors aside, 1930s New York seems to have been an idol for young Rothbard, and one that he clung to ferociously in later years. New York street life was vital and fun. At that time, New York was studded with inexpensive cafeterias where one could sit nursing a cup of coffee for hours and either read or discuss ideas undisturbed. There was, for Rothbard, also a sense of racial order. Oh boy. There was no harassment, no sense of crime lurking around every corner. White would go up to the Apollo Theater in Harlem to watch Pearl Bailey and other great entertainers with no sense of fear whatsoever. There were no bums or aggressive beggars on the street. If anyone wanted to see a bum, they could go to a short street downtown called Bowery, where bums or winos hung out. I imagine this is probably right before he has that line that the police should be used to clear the street of bums and whatnot. If you haven't heard that quote from Rothbard, it's a gem. Rothbard loved Dixie Jazz and George Gershwin. Right on. I'm a fan of big bands myself. In his film criticisms for libertarian form in the 1970s, he at first prefers Mel Brooks and Woody Allen because he detects in Brooks an older, healthier tradition of comedy, one that harks back to the superb tradition of the Marx Brothers pictures of the 1930s, with the possible exception of the W.C. Fields canon, the funniest pictures ever made. But with... he loves nigger music. Good music's good music. But rap is not music. Don't ever confuse rap with music. And I'm not saying that just because most people who rap are black. I'm just like, from a technical definition standpoint, it's not music. But anyway, I digress. But with Annie Hall and Manhattan, Rothbard felt Allen showed himself to be a past-looking, curmudgeonly social critic, longing for old jazz on the radio and old pictures in movie houses. His review of Manhattan provides a striking revelation of his own self-conception. The greatest satirists from Swift to Chesterton to Mencken, and now to Woody Allen have always and necessarily been cultural conservatives and reactionaries. By transmuting his rage and the sadness of nostalgia into the bracing and liberating joy of wit and laughter, the satirist not only liberates his own psyche, he can have momentous social effect until, as in the height of the wonder of reading Swift or Mencken or in watching Manhattan, it almost seems that the walls of Jericho can indeed come a-tumbling down, and that one lone man can change the culture. And in many ways he can and has. The Woody Allen movie that most comes to mind when one reads Rothbard's sentimental musings on life growing up in the 1930s and 40s is Radio Days, the director's memoir of his childhood in Brooklyn, depicting the impression one gets from Rothbard's youth. And I'm going to skip around a little bit and try to prune some of it now so I'm not up till fucking 1 a.m, but I'm gonna finish this thing, so don't you fucking worry. The impression one gets from Rothbard's youth is a bit like Radio Days, but America First Committee Chairman John T. Flynn is blaring on the set. That'd be fucking something. McCarthyism didn't go far enough. We need Pinochetianism. We need helicopter rides. That's all I'm saying. You know me. He liked to cozy up with the yellow journalism of the New York Sun and the Hearst newspapers, and America First Committee founder and Flynn's anti-result conspiracy theories in the Chicago Tribune. Later, Rothbard would defend Charles Lindbergh and the American Firsters for charges of anti-Semitism, but also averred that what anti-Semitism there was caused by the Jews themselves. Fucking based. Influential Jews and Jewish organizations helped agitate for war and helped also put economic pressure upon opponents of the war. This very fact, of course, served to embitter many isolationists against the Jews, and again created a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. This resentment was intensified by the hysterical treatment accorded to any isolationist who dared so much as mention these activities by Jews. Yeah, Chris Cantwell mentions this in... Chris Cantwell has been doing a lot of calls from the Charlottesville prison with Mike Enoch, and they actually talk about pretty extensively about how Rothbard was being one of them, parentheses, gave Rothbard a lot of inside info on their inner workings, and he was pretty pissed at his own people, which is funny as hell to me. Rothbard seems to have shown little interest in the plight of his fellow Jews in Europe during the period. That's funny. He had no interest in fighting in the war when it came. He got a 4F classification and thus avoided the draft. But for his anti-war sentiment and his devotion to the old right, which he called a coalition of fury and despair against the enormous acceleration of big government brought about by the New Deal, he found himself isolated again when he started Columbia University at 16. At 16, hot damn. Fucking Ashkenazi IQ right there, my boy. 1 year before a fellow Bronx native matriculated, the equally precocious Roy Cohn, who would later go on to be an attorney, first for Joseph McCarthy and then later for Donald Trump. Neat. Rothbard said Carrie Fisher was ugly and abrasive. I mean, I never got the big hype over Carrie Fisher in the Slave Leia outfit. I always thought that was kind of overhyped. And I could see her being pretty abrasive. Rothbard himself was an anti-Zionist, and Jewish religion itself requires a state. Yeah. I could see Rothbard being anti-Zionist. That's kind of funny. I can't say I fall into that camp, because I think you give the Jews a state, you give them somewhere to go, then that kind of answers the question of, do they have to leech off of your culture and your country? But that's a discussion for another time. Rothbard found solace in the informal seminars held at NYU by the Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises, a refugee from Hitler's Europe. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Mises founded 2 schools to study the business cycle, one in Vienna and then I think he had to flee, and then he ended up founding a second in NYU. Have no clue if it's still there, have no clue if there's any reference to Mises still on the NYU campus, but because, it's New York, so it's left as hell, but who knows? One can hope. He wrote an essay about it. I'm sure he did. I mean, you could spend hours on the Mises Institute website digging up old articles from like the libertarian forums that Mises posted in, but I don't know. Eventually you become jaded to the things Rothbard says. Already a convinced libertarian, it was from Mises that he got his taste for vast, systematic treatises on economics based on what Mises called praxeological principles, the belief that the entire realm of human action could be reduced to a few simple axioms that laid out man's self-interested drive to better his material conditions. That's certainly a straw man of praxeology. That is very much a straw man, because it's not just material conditions, it's a preference for better conditions in whatever is perceived to be better. It's not just material. Materialism is reducing it far too much, but Rothbard believed that everything in economics could be derived from the logical implications of the concept man acts. This notion that human beings do things for one reason or another never struck Rothbard, it seems, as too simple or too unenlightening. Well, is it? Because that statement is true. Now, granted, I think the problem with praxeology lies less in the fact that it states this axiom as fact, and more in its current use. Because someone mentioned before, if I scroll back up in the chat over here, someone mentioned, yes, is this the guy from Moral Philosophy? Yeah, if you remember the episode of Moral, if you remember the Patreon hangout where we talked about praxeology, which I think was the last one, and I think Tom actually kept that listed on his channel, so you can go check it out. We talk about things like praxeology can't be used to derive facts about the business cycle, or like what the real interest rate should be, or like specific government policy. To an extent, it can't be used for all that, and you do economics a disservice when you disregard good empirical data for this kind of stretching the philosophy you want to really unreasonable lengths. But at the same time, I don't think that's a critique of praxeology. I think that's a critique of the use of praxeology. I was actually going over and listening to the podcast again, and I was thinking to myself, well, this isn't a critique of praxeology. This is a critique of how it's used, which is fine. You should critique how something is used. But I don't think, and of course, Dusty had his whole thing about technically there can be no a priori knowledge because knowledge is a relational concept between the physical world and human beings themselves. So without human beings, there is no knowledge, yada, yada, yada. Although I think that's somewhat missing the larger point of what praxeology tries to talk. But I respect Dusty a lot for his philosophical knowledge. I like him a lot. But anyway, back to this whole thing. No matter how abstract the economics he liked were, Rothbard never lost his taste for concrete politics. He was particularly drawn to the first reactions against the early stirrings of the civil rights legislation. In 1948, he horrified his fellow Jewish students by leading a meeting of students for Thurman Group. He claimed toward the end of his life to have founded the group, but if he did not cop to it in his effusive fan letter to Strom Thurmond, states' rights Democrats in Jackson, Mississippi. Excuse me. Although a New Yorker born and bred, I was a staunch supporter of the Thurmond movement. A good friend of mine headed the Columbia Students for Thurmond, which I believed was the only such collegiate movement north of the Mason-Dixon line. So Rothbard was a Dixiecrat, go figure. But he only regretted that Thurmond's movement was too regional, too southern, saying it was imperative for the states' rights movement to establish itself on a nationwide scale, where it could grow into a mighty movement if you have the will and vision. There are millions of Americans throughout the country, Republicans and Democrats, who would flock to your banner. It's a reasonable assumption. It's less so now. Federalism has kind of run rampant. But at the time Rothbard was writing, this could have been a real option. Discord. The way Tundra uses praxeology is kind of stupid. Oh yeah, this is a reference to the Trudeau Tom Discord, but I find this a lot. Egoists try to malform other philosophies to fit their own. Like I'm friends with another egoist, and I guess he follows Rosa Luxemburg or something, and he said something to the effect that she's melded communistic ethics with like the ethical and psychological egoism of Max Stirner, which I find ridiculous, but whatever. Continuing, he did not find himself at home with the new right rallying around William F. Buckley's National Review. Oh, we're getting into this, are we? Good. But it was Joseph McCarthy and McCarthyism that provided Rothbard with one of his main political inspirations. In 1954, when Roy Cohn was forced to resign as McCarthy's counsel, Rothbard wrote a speech for students of America's George Reisman to give at what would be a rancorous goodbye feast for Cohn at the Hotel Astor. With McCarthy in attendance, Reisman declaimed Rothbard's words. There's been only one thing wrong with the famous methods of you or that other great American senator, Joe McCarthy. You have been too kind, too courteous, too considerate, too decent to realize in the fullest sense the viciousness and venom of the left smear bun that's dedicated to drive every effective anti-communist from public life. The communists and their New Dealer cousins may have their family quarrels at times, but essentially they have been united for 21 years in popular front regime of the left. Rothbard advocating for helicopter rides before it was cool. The more I read about Rothbard, the more I like him. I really do. People like Nick Fuentes, and I love Nick Fuentes. If you guys aren't subscribed to America First Media with Nick Fuentes and James Alsup, you're not living life right. But Nick Fuentes goes the fuck on about libertarianism and particularly Rand all the time, and he is strawmanning them, but I don't want to say it like that because it sounds like I'm being a bitch about it. But just genuinely, he says libertarianism is a left-wing movement, and I know he's talking about libertarianism, but, you know, genuinely, you read this shit and it's like, nah, fam, nah, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, Nick Fuentes, sit the fuck down. But I love him. I love the man, with all his flaws. Rosa Luxemburg was a third-wave feminist and deserved to be murdered and spat on her grave. You're lucky I can translate your shit, Voltaire. I mean, that wasn't so bad, but yeah, fuck Rosa Luxemburg. I actually don't know which one of his works that my friend was referring to, but I have no interest in reading her anyway. In the recorded version of this speech, you can hear the crowd going totally wild. Fucking neat. I wonder if Hoppe was in the crowd too. Rothbard's McCarthyism was idiosyncratic. He mostly liked that it was directed at the federal bureaucracies because he hated the very existence of those institutions. He did not find himself at home with the new right rallying around William F. Buckley's National Review. He objected on principle to any and all foreign interventionism, and besides, he thought the New Deal consensus at home was a far greater and more important enemy than the communist regimes abroad. In the 1950s and early 1960s, he was employed at the Volcker Fund, organized by ex-America First Committee member Harold W. Lunow, where he became a prolific writer of strategy memos for the right. It was here where he began to articulate populist, demagogic strategy to short-circuit the state, and where he wrote the memo entitled In Defense of Demagogues. A later moment of reflection, 1979's The Betrayal of the American Right provided the occasion for refinement of the theory. On top of it being targeted at bureaucrats, he wrote, there was another reason for my own fascination with the McCarthy phenomenon, his populism. There was a vital need to appeal directly to the masses emotionally, even demagogically, over the heads of the establishment, of the Ivy League, of the mass media, the liberal intellectuals, of the Republican-Democrat political party structure, in some by a populist short circuit. It was the open-ended sense that there was no audacity of which McCarthy was not capable that frightened liberals. And this thrilled young Rothbard. Damn right. Like, that's the thing I'd say about all of this and Rothbard. He was pragmatic. He genuinely was. And, you know, that's something I kind of learned from him and took from him, you know, to me and my name a little bit. And if I'm being completely honest, that's what people like. Like, oftentimes people conflate libertarianism with, like, you know, voluntary action. If you go through state, it means you're being an idiot. But, you know, if you garner actual support, you know, if you're an intellectual worthy of merit and this is how you go about doing it, Rothbard recognized the need for using the state to achieve libertarian ends, because that is a possible thing. Don't listen to the lolberts. If you don't know what I mean by lolbertarian, I just mean like really, really basic bitch libertarians, like the guy who runs the Anarchy Ball Facebook page, or fucking Jeffrey Tucker. The best part was she was murdered. Oh, Rosa Luxemburg? Lol. Anyway, goddamn, this article is long, but we're almost done with it. The other big idea that Rothbard cooked up during his years at the Volcker Fund was to borrow from a particular tradition on the left, one that would have been very familiar from his Bronx boyhood. In a 1961 memo entitled What is to be Done, after Lenin's 1901 pamphlet of the same name, Rothbard outlined a strategy for the movement. Here we stand, then, a hardcore of libertarian individualist revolutionaries, anxiously not only to develop our own understanding of this wonderful system of thought, but also anxious to spread its principles and its policies to the rest of society. How do we go about it? I think that here we can learn a great deal from Lenin and Leninists. Not too much, of course, but particularly the idea that particularly the idea that the Leninist part is the main, or indeed only, moral principle. Ha ha ha, Anarchy Ball. Yes, laugh at him. He deserves to be laughed at. Don't forget to laugh at Jeffrey Tucker, too. Do not listen to Esoteric. Esoteric. We're referring to Esoteric Entity, but oh, Esoteric. He means well. He hasn't given it a lot of philosophical thought. I don't know the extent of his reading or his actual knowledge, but he has such surface level analyses of these deep ideas. And he does them great disservice by not actually giving them their proper due, which is a problem. But anyway, what Rothbard thought the libertarian movement needed to copy from Leninism were professional cadres of dedicated ideologues to organize and spread the faith. After an abortive attempt to woo the New Left in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, this was almost certainly the vision of Rothbard brought to Charles Koch when he inspired him to found the Cato Institute at the Koch Ski Lodge in Vail. Oh, so he went to the Kochs. I didn't know that. Well, that fucking backfired, because as we know now, the Cato Institute is fucking useless, and I'm sure Rothbard would be spinning in his grave if he knew the shit that the Cato Institute was up to, because they're just like basic bitch libertarians squared. Lenin was a master of rhetoric, propaganda, and demagoguery. Indeed, he was. So, yeah, like I said, like I mentioned earlier, he was taking strategy from Lenin, not actual ideas, which is, of course, the right thing to do. Over the course of a weekend in the winter of 1976, Raimondo writes, Rothbard and the heir to one of the largest family-held corporations in the nation talked into the night. And as the roaring fire and the elaborate stone fireplace burned down to flickering embers, Rothbard outlined the need to organize and systematize burgeoning libertarian movement and bring the order out of chaos. Cato Institute was a good start for that, I'd say. They still, for all the shit I give them and for all the shit a lot of people give them, they still produce a hell of a lot of good data. A lot of good papers come out of Cato Institute, folks, so, they're good for something. Just don't take them too seriously. The name Cato itself was Rothbard's idea. It was after John Trenchard and Thomas Gordon's Cato Letters pamphlets that inspired the American Revolution. Interesting. I didn't know that. I guess Cato Letters is a reference to one of the Catos from Roman history. Was a Cato a younger, Cato the older, that would always yell at the Senate that Carthage must be destroyed. Cato Institute is more academic and formal than Ludwig von Mises Institute. Yeah, that's absolutely true, and that's why there's a lot more good data, and that's why they're taken a lot more seriously than the Mises Institute. But such is life. I'd certainly say the Mises Institute is more of what Rothbard envisioned in terms of, now activating that growing group of burgeoning libertarians and being the demagogues, because, you got your Tom Woodses, you got your Hans Hermann Hoppas, you got your Walter Blocks, that kind of thing. So Mises Institute and Cato are really two sides of the same coin, but Cato is people at the Cato Institute are too much of a bitch to acknowledge that. So that's their fault. But you'll excuse me for just a moment, folks. I will be right back. Am I still screen sharing? No, stop. There we go. All right. Oh, wow, 6 viewers. Look at that. Well, 5. I will be back in just, how many minutes? 3 minutes. So, brief intermission here, folks. All right, back right on time. Nice. Hope everybody enjoyed that little bit of break. I know my voice needed it for just a quick second. But we're all set up now, and let's get back to it. Here we go. All right. Yes, I know I'm sharing. Shut up. All right. Pamphlets that inspired the American Revolution. They took the name from Cato the Younger, Julius Caesar's Republican foe. Oh. Wait a minute. Hold on. Which Cato was it? I think they're going to tell us. But as Raimundo points out, it was meant to invoke his grandfather Cato the Elder as well. The old Roman senator, after all, had ended every speech with the famous imprecation against Rome's ancient enemy, Carthage must be destroyed. Oh, so it was Cato the Elder. The Latin translation of that is Carthago delenda est, which is something I still remember from Latin 2 years ago. But Latin's a great language. Take it if you have the opportunity to. It helps you so much, especially if you're reading ancient philosophical works. If you know the language and you know the original text, it helps. But again, I get delayed. Insert the state in the place of the Carthaginians, and the name conjures the Rothbardian spirit that imbued the founders of this new intellectual enterprise. Interesting. Rothbard got quickly to work. In early 1977, he distributed a highly confidential 178-page memo meant only for the inner circle of Cato, called Toward a Strategy for Libertarian Social Change. Within his deeper elaboration and analysis of Leninist strategy and tactics, again calling for professionalized hardcore libertarian cadres and purity of principle combined with entrepreneurial flexibility of tactics. Following the course of the Bolshevik Revolution, he believed the best course of action was to follow the centrist path. Boo. Boo centrism. That is, they were to stay radical, but also stay practical. Yeah, practical. Pragmatic. Yeah, I'm an ass. Don't lose sight of the ultimate goal by getting mired in reformist coalitions, but don't isolate the party of dedicated anti-status by making hopeless, chaotic stance either. Yeah, well, some of the dedicated anti-statists are fucking spurgs who kind of need to be dropped, but we'll keep them in mind. Cough, cough, anarchy ball. To the example of Lenin and the Bolsheviks, Rothbard now adds Hitler and the Nazis, who had the tactical advantage, he wrote, of a clear two-group good guy versus bad guy dichotomy. He also discusses with interest the Italian futurist's corrosive contempt for the mores of old society as an avant-garde paving the way for the triumph of the fascist movement. He felt libertarians could benefit from the lessons of the fascists' use of emotionally stirring propaganda and spectacles, as well as their enlistment of the youth cause. I mean, these are all effective strategies. Libertarians have failed to use all of them, essentially, which is why friggin' Austin Peterson had to run as a Republican, and he's not doing horribly, to his credit. But, you know, libertarians don't understand pragmatism at all, especially the Libertarian Party of the United States. But anyway, he believed that the supreme willpower was the quality most needed in a political leader. But he cautions the movement has to be straight in its appearance, radical in content, conservative in form. I like that motto. I'm going to steal that for something else sometime. Not too much shocking of the bourgeoisie, and no shaggy haircuts. Libertarian cadders must appear respectable. The LP kind of blew that the fuck out of the water. If you haven't seen the videos from last year's Libertarian Party conference with the fat naked dude running up on stage, or he wasn't naked, he had underwear or something on, but still. The Libertarian Party is absolute human trash. Anyway, the memo briefly caused a storm in right-wing circles and then was largely forgotten. It leaked to the National Review, which got particularly upset about the invocation of Lenin, but it did not shake Rothbard's position at Cato yet. For his part, Justin Raimondo, toward the close of his Rothbard biography, expresses his belief that the strategy memo is still more or less Cato policy. I'd say much less, looking at them now. There's one Cato guy who went on Tucker and tried to argue that illegal immigration was actually good for the country because, much cheaper production, but they're just leeching off of state wealth, not only welfare, but off of state infrastructure at such a massive rate. It's impossible to justify that nowadays. Brink Lindsay, who was at Cato for 20 years and is now at the Niskanen Center, said that while he never saw the memo during his time at Cato, Rothbard's radical antipathy toward the state long outlived his tenure. That much is still true about Cato, but it's kind of to an autistic, useless degree now. The ultimate goal of minarchy or anarchy was and is the intellectual orthodoxy at Cato, always in the background with consequentialist policy analysis in the foreground. At one point, I don't think I'm subscribing now. Thank you very much. Your fucking hit piece has done enough to dissuade me from that. But anyway. But it did not shake Rothbard's position. At one point in the memo, Rothbard talks approvingly about the American Revolution, but regrets that it was ruined by the drafting of the Constitution. True. Federalism is cancer, kids. Rothbard's truculence amid infighting in the tiny Libertarian Party and his insistence on ideological purity. He was upset when they brought in a Chicago school rather than Austrian school economists. Was he pissed about Milton Friedman? Is that what this is? Eventually soured the other member of Cato's inner sanctum against him. Oh. The full picture starts to come into place. He was pushed out in 1981, but quickly found a new home, the more radical Ludwig von Mises Institute, founded by a firebrand named Lew Rockwell, who was also Ron Paul's congressional chief of staff from 1978 to 1982. So I see. It's funny that he got pushed out. It says he got pushed out for purity here, which is interesting now because, you know, really, I would have thought he would have been pushed. I mean, it's kind of a radical purity, fine, but it's a purity. It's an ANCAP type purity, and I guess he was pushed out because he was being a bad boy ANCAP, and they were being good guy minarchists, I suppose. And I guess that what does it. But I thought it would be a different kind of radicalism that got him ejected from Cato, but I see it from this angle as well. Joined with the conservative Catholic Rockwell. Oh, I didn't know he was a Catholic. Bonus points. Rothbard returned firmly to his old right roots, and together they devised a synthesis they called paleo-libertarianism. Friedman was a bitch for that. Fredman. Who is Fredman, Voltaire? I don't know who Fredman is. I know. You've told me I called Friedman a bitch. I don't remember calling Friedman a bitch. I like Milton Friedman. He does good stuff. He just doesn't take it far enough. Although I think his son David Friedman does a better job at completing his father's an economic analysis where he last left off. But anyway, Friedman. Yeah, I know. A position that was radically anti-state but conservative in its cultural values. Indeed, this is true. They would, in Rockwell's terms, delouse the movement and end the association of libertarianism with shaggy, good-time, countercultural libertinism. The synonym for libertinism is lawbertarianism. Although Rothbard got an academic appointment at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas in 1985, he was still able to write prolifically for his political causes and to advocate strongly for Ron Paul's bid as the libertarian candidate. Yeah, you read Ron Paul's and the Fed, and he talks a lot about speaking with Rothbard. And the University of Las Vegas is where Hoppe currently does stuff. You can go on their website. He's still listed there. I have no clue if he actually teaches anything there, though. Was thinking of writing about this topic. Thanks for sharing. Oh, you're welcome. I'm happy I was able to get this to you. Yeah. I don't know what in particular you're thinking about writing about for Rothbard, but he's an interesting figure. A lot of waves of different political opinions flowing over you as you read it, but he's an interesting figure nonetheless. This is actually, for like all the poisoning of the well this does for libertarianism and like far right wing opinions, it's actually a reasonably well done Spark Notes kind of deal of the biography of Rothbard, which I appreciate very much because I didn't know all of this stuff. No, I'm taking this all at face value as true because I don't have a problem with it, but it could be that he's over exaggerating certain parts in this article, this Brian Nance guy or whatever. Now, to continue, the writing Rockwell produced on behalf of Ron Paul in the 1980s and early 1990s is quite frank in its racism, homophobia, and paranoia about AIDS. Part of what Rothbard described as an outreach to the rednecks. Racism, homophobia, and paranoia about AIDS. This sounds like the Ron Paul newsletters all over again, but I don't think it is. I don't think it's... Ron Paul got called racist because he pointed out, A, that 85% of people who committed crimes, something like that, or 85% of crime recidivism in the Washington, D.C. area was black. And then he said, well, DC is a liberal city, so they're probably covering up some numbers too. And then he tacked on 10%, and it's like, yeah, the crime recidivism in DC is probably almost 95% black. And he got called racist for that. But that's not racist for pointing out facts. Yeah, he went a little bit far in maybe tacking 10% on. But I've read the newsletters. He's not racist, nor is he homophobic or sexist or whatever the hell he is. The famous Ron Paul newsletters and Fuck Right Wing Watch. Oh, that guy's just a hit piece artist. It's not even like he has Ron Paul's best hits. This guy, Right Wing Watch, he's some kind of, a right wing. He smears the right wing. And, It's stupid. It's stupid garbage. And he has this video called Ron Paul's Best Hits. And it's literally like the most mundane shit. It's like Rothbard talking about how he like the AIDS crisis and how he's kind of semi a creationist. I don't know. I know Ron Paul's a pretty staunch Christian of some denomination, but I don't know if he's like full on creationist. But he's got some quotes about, oh, the theory of evolution. Oh, do you believe in this right or that, whatever. But it's like, it's so mundane. The things the left gets triggered over is so pathetic. But anyway, the writing Rockwell produced on behalf of Ron Paul in the late, and then part of Outrage Rednecks. By 1990, the Ron Paul newsletter started discussing David Duke in favorable terms, but it was in 1992, after David Duke's failed presidential run, that Rothbard, in an article entitled Right-Wing Populism from the Rockwell-Rothbard Report, fully puts Duke's politics in the context of his earlier articulated populist short-circuit strategy. There he encourages emulation of Duke. It is fascinating that there was nothing in Duke's current program or campaign that could not be embraced by paleo-conservatives or paleo-libertarians. Lower taxes, dismantling the bureaucracy, slashing the welfare system, attacking affirmative action and racist set-asides, calling for equal rights for all Americans, including whites. What's wrong with any of that? I mean, Rothbard was writing this as a Jew. Ultimately, it was Pat Buchanan who was to be Rothbard's man in 1992. I mean, Rothbard was calling out anti-white racism before the whole alt-right thing, and he was a Jew. What a guy! What a guy! Ron, the author of those pamphlets, Paul. That's like, it's not even funny. Like that's how people know him. It's true. Even Austin Peterson describes that he was so shocked and appalled by the Ron Paul newsletters. Like, Austin Peterson, you bitch. Oh my God, if you guys haven't seen this video of Austin Peterson calling into Chris Cantwell's radical agenda, I encourage you to go see it. It's a thing of beauty. If you've ever heard the term pyramid pile of pussy, that's the video where that term evolved from. I think the title of the video is Chris Cantwell Bitch Slaps Austin Peterson or something to that effect. But it is funny as hell. So by all means, when you're done with this, go Google that, go YouTube that video. Rothbard applauded the bell curve for destroying the egalitarian myth that has been the major ideological groundwork for the welfare state. Yeet. The libertarians aren't going to like this very much. Voltaire, when you get a chance, I haven't been on the new Cool Capitalist Kids chat in a while because of school, but feel free to drop this article in there and see what shit it stirs up. But let us continue. But the clearest expression of Rothbard's racism, racism, that's a meaningless word, by the way, comes in his review of Charles Murray's and Richard Herrnstein's The Book, The Bell Curve, in 1994. As far back as his underregulated years, Rothbard believed that the statistical regularities expressed in bell curves were a load of bullshit. Did he now? Well, what is the evidence for this? Evidence of this vital assumption around a normal curve? None whatever. It is a purely mystical act of faith. See, here's where sources would help. It's a joke, which I think you're referring to saying them calling Rothbard racist is a joke. Yeah, and yeah, I would say it's a joke. Because fucking, everybody's racist to people like this. The name of this, what's the name of this friggin' website? It's the Baffler. Never heard of it before, but it sounds like, a leftist attempt at being somewhat intellectual. No, it's purely, look, I don't honestly put it, Murray Rothbard to have said all of this. Hans Hermann Hoppe said some stupid shit about inflation. Murray Rothbard has said some stupid shit. And if this is, of course, a fault, so I'm majoring in applied math. So yes, the bell curve is a real thing, and there's plenty of backing for it. So don't be taken aback by what he says. He stayed remarkably consistent in remarkably consistent in his review of Murray's book. He thought there was entirely too much reliance on boring numbers and evidence, that it doesn't get to the good stuff fast enough. I'm reading that and I'm trying to think, are they criticizing him because they're saying that he doesn't like the evidence, or are they honestly stating that, oh, he was just getting bored by too much info and they wanted him to come to the conclusions and spend more time on those? With these leftist hit pieces, it's hard to tell sometimes, but anyway. The Herrnstein-Murray book almost drowns its subjects in statistics and qualifications, and it tries to downplay the entire race issue, devoting most of its space to inheritable differences among individuals within each ethnic or racial group. He applauds the book for destroying the egalitarian myth that has been the major player on the welfare state, and in its racial aspect for the entire vast, ever-expanding civil rights affirmative action set-aside quota aspect of the welfare state. The recognition of inheritance and natural inequalities among races as well as among individuals knocks the props out from under the welfare system, state system. This is very true. And how does paper pieces make society richer? Yeah, that's the Hans Hermann Hoppe quote. He does. Austrian economists, they're smart guys. They say dumb shit sometimes. And I suppose I get what Rothbard is talking about when he says he drowns them in stats. If you ever pay, for any of you out there who haven't read The Bell Curve, and I haven't read it entirely, but I've read select bits and pieces, but it's statistics and heavy, like super heavy. So, like, I wouldn't say you have to take a statistics class to understand it fully. They do a good enough job of explaining what the statistics mean, but I would be lying if I didn't say a college level class helped me, because fucking, you know, there were tough reads. It's a tough read. But Rothbard is certainly right about the welfare, about racial egalitarianism being the basis for the welfare state. And I think this is at the heart of another debacle, which I might mention at the end of this because I've been somewhat involved in it. In a sense, he was right. Yeah, in a sense, he was right. But you have to throw in so much supplementary garbage that Hoppe's statement on his own is meaningless. But enough about Hoppe. We're talking about his teacher, the based Rothbard. No, I know you meant Hoppe. But if based Rothbard, I want to see Rothbard in an episode of Murdoch. Someone fucking forward this article to the people at Murdoch, and get Murray Rothbard as the only truly based Jew in. I want that happening now. If and when we as populists and libertarians abolish the welfare state in all of its aspects, and property rights and the free market shall be triumphant once more, many individuals and groups will be predictably not like the end result. In that case, those ethnic and other groups who might be concentrated in lower income or less prestigious occupations, guided by their socialistic mentors, will predictably raise the cry that the free market capitalism is evil and discriminatory, and that therefore collectivism is needed to redress the balance. In short, racialist science is properly not an act of aggression or a cover for oppression of one group over another, but on the contrary, an operation in defense of private property against assaults by aggressors. Damn. This is something. I'm sorry. I saw you commented, Voltaire, but this is I like this. This is. I know I'm throwing around the word based a lot, but in all genuineness, this is like you can see. I imagine the alt-right would be better taking more of its economics from Murray Rothbard. I've always advocated that, but this is some cool shit, I have to say. Bill Buckley was okay. No, he wasn't. Him and Irving Kristol were the founders of neoconservatism, and Bill Buckley's purge of the National Review made it a neocon rag and paved the way for hacks like Jonah Goldberg to shit on Steve Bannon constantly. I read the National Review because it's good right-wing reading still, but you get too much into the Trump stuff, and it's no different than CNN. I have a game I'm planning on doing called Ben Shapiro tweet or CNN headline about Trump. And because, you take away Ben Shapiro's screeds about, my SJ's W's and my free speech and that kind of bullshit, and his feed on Trump and the shit he says about Trump is indistinguishable from leftists, which I don't think is a good look for him. Because if your whole thing is that, oh, we're different than the left, but here we're going to fucking, adopt their fucking talking points about Trump, well, then you're essentially conceding that the right wing is no better than a bunch of racist bigots. And if you're going to adopt their language, that's what you're conceding. So I respect the ghost of Buckley. That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying that. Oh, well, the Ghost of Buckley is a Twitter account, folks, and he's still too much of a neocon bitch for me, but he seems nice enough. He's a nice guy. I said a tweet a while ago, if I can see myself sitting down at a bar with you and having a beer and us just shooting the shit, then we can be friends, and it's not too much of a big deal, but his politics are still shit. Wow, I think that was the longest break from the article we've taken so far, but to get back to it, hear what Rothbard meant when he talks about non-aggression and self-defense is made plain. The ideological rampart of the post-welfare order against egalitarian attacks would have to be scientifically dressed up racism. Ugh. Defending the property rights of the rightful masters sorted to the top by the come on, sound it out, Joe. The ineluctable logic of the market. Ineluctable? All right. We're doing another Google search for fucking words here, ladies and gentlemen. Because I am a brainlet, apparently. Fuck. Damn, no. That wasn't what I meant to do. What is this? Ineluctable, unable to be resisted or avoided, inescapable. All right. I'm sure that has a Latin root that I'm not remembering, but whatever. It's not by the ineluctable logic of the market. I mean, fucking plenty of people have come to acknowledge this fact before, like the fact that IQ is a predictor and certain groups have of success, and people with higher IQs do better in a free market. These are facts. And the fact that certain groups have different IQs means that certain groups will end up naturally in certain places in the capitalist hierarchy. That's just how it is. That's not racism. It's just a fact of life. But yeah, at this point, his appeal to the alt-right shouldn't be much of a mystery. It wasn't much of a mystery too long ago. I'm surprised you're just bringing it up now. Yeah, no, I wish the alt-right took more from Rothbard. A year later, Rothbard was dead. Fuck. Went from 0 to 100 real quick. His old foes tried to bury him. The leader of the conservative movement, William F. Buckley, sneered in his obituary at a man he had once been on friendly terms with. I guess this is another example of the falling out that was mentioned earlier. And Murray's here, let me try to read this in the faggoty-ass voice of William F. Buckley Jr. I can't say that. William F. Buckley's voice was as smooth as fucking butter, but I still despise him. I gotta pick up the voice of a Southern gentleman. In Murray's case, much of what drove him was a contrarian spirit, the deranging scrupulosity that caused him to disdain such as Herbert Hoover, Ronald Reagan, Milton Friedman, and yes, Newt Gingrich, while huffing and puffing in the little cloister whose walls he labored so strenuously to contract, leaving him in the end, not as the father of a swelling movement that roused the masses from their slumber, as he once stated in his ambition, but with about as many disciples as David Koresh had in his little redoubt in Waco. Wow, fuck you, William F. Buckley. Yes, Murray Rothbard believed in freedom, and yes, David Koresh believed in God. This is why I hate fucking neocons. They don't know how to argue without fucking smearing their opponents like the left. They're really just as big as bitches. Just a bunch of bitches, just as much as the left is. But Rothbard's vision ends up desolate and despairing. That's, so basically calling him a fundamentalist. Yeah, that's what Buckley is attempting to do to Rothbard here, but I mean, you can't be a pragmatist and a fundamentalist. They're two very much diametrically opposed things to each other. And so you just can't have that type of deal. So, Buckley was an idiot in that sense. But anyway, who laughs last laughs best, Rothbard's ghost might reply. That'd be quite a reply. The fact is that the American right looks more like Rothbard's vision than Buckley's. And also, dogma is not a bad thing. No, it's not. The people who constantly bitch and moan about dogma being a problem are absolute morons, because it's not the case. Dogma is not a problem. Everybody has dogma. Dogma is a necessary thing in order for, humans to live ordered lives. And so, but I don't think dogma was a part of it. Calling someone a fundamentalist is a bit more than a claim that they follow dogma too rigidly. They're hypocrites. Yes, neocons are very much hypocrites because their dogma is not only more rigid, but it's worse, just from a factual standpoint. But anyway, the fact is that the American right looks more like Rothbard's vision than Buckley's. That's not true. That's an overstatement of what the right looks like. I would love it if it did look like that, but Buckley's fucking forearm and fist is still firmly up the rectum of the GOP. And to claim otherwise is not a fair assessment of the situation of the political right. His disciples have noticed. That is true, I have noticed. In July 2016, Raimondo wrote in The American Conservative, Rothbard, who died in 1995, would have loved Donald Trump and seems to have foreseen his rise as if in a dream. Yes, this is true. I actually got in an argument in the comment section of an Austin Peterson video about it. And way back when, I claimed Rothbard would not have supported Donald Trump in the slightest. But looking back on it, I was wrong. He would have. But being wrong wasn't a bad thing, because at the time I was like staunch libertarian type, oh, Trump's bad because, he's just as bad as Clinton, yada, yada, yada. I was hard on that stuff because I was a Rand Paul supporter way back when. Not to say I still don't support Rand Paul. I like Rand and Ron Paul. They're cool dudes, although Ron's kind of going off the deep end a bit lately. He's getting a bit soft in his old age as opposed to Murray, who got as hard as nails. But I need you to stream with Ghost of Buckley. Hell, I'm done with finals. I'll stream with Ghost of Buckley. We'll shoot the shit. I'm cool with that. This fucking conversation with Spino, though, it's like, oh, I'm going to get into this at the end of the stream. I'm going to get into this. I'm going to get into the Kraut drama, which I've inserted myself into because I'm a lowly nobody and a click whore, but for later. But it was more than just a dream. Trump was in part the product of his will, of his ideas, his prodigious body of writing, of the political alliances he built, of intellectuals he trained and influenced, a lifetime of bile, spleen, and hate against what he saw as the establishment. I'd love to believe that Rothbard somehow organized this from beyond the grave, or that there's some kind of influence that Rothbard still holds over any part of the political mainframe. But I can't say that's true to any honest degree. Like, it's just not. I can't say it is. Because you two hold similar views and subtle differences. I don't think we hold similar views. I mean, we're both generally right-wing, but I'm not sure I'd call that similar views. But anyway, I said earlier that to find a close role model of Rothbard, one had to look at fiction. To Dostoevsky's Demons, but Demons was based on what Dostoevsky saw happening in his society. He based the doctrines of the revolutionary cell led by Verhovensky on the thoughts of a real man, the nihilist Sergei. I'm Ukrainian, I should be able to pronounce this. Sergei Nechayev. Maybe Rand Paul. Yeah. If Ghost of Buckley endorsed Rand Paul, I'd be surprised as fucked, but hell, stranger things have happened. Reading Rothbard feels like reading Nietzsche at times, particularly in his belief that the primary role of the revolution was to aid the growth of calamity and every evil. I don't think Rothbard wanted to do that, and to make any alliance, advocate any idea, and encourage any force against the state. You disappointed your ancestors. Yes, I did. I'm a bad Ukrainian. I know this. I'm a bad Untermensch. But, see, there's a conflation here, of course, between anarcho-capitalism and chaos, or any anarchy and chaos, I should say, because this is the thing about the right. And the real distinction between the right and the left is that the right accepts hierarchy and the left rejects it. It also ties into the belief in positive and negative rights, but that's also kind of a hierarchy thing too, in a sense. But the thing about anarcho-capitalism is that it just reorders hierarchy in what Rothbard saw as a more ethical way. And so it's not like chaos, it's just a different kind of organization. Now, with left anarchy, you see something different. And depending on how you define anarchy, because leftists don't define anarchy the same way, you know, it all depends. If you're a leftist who defines anarchy as the rejection of all hierarchy, then anarcho-capitalism isn't anarchy, but fine, whatever. I don't care. If it's not anarchy, it's not anarchy. I don't even advocate it anymore as a practical solution to what's happening right now. But if you define anarchy as the abolition of unjust hierarchy, which is a definition the YouTuber Badmouse has used, then anarcho-capitalism is definitely anarchy, as I would argue it. And so, because it's just unjust hierarchy, it's not all hierarchy as a whole. But like I said, I don't even advocate for anarcho-capitalism. I just defend it in theory, pretty much. It's not a good solution to what the problems we have right now. But anyway, another long tangent. Ooh boy. Ooh lad. Therefore, in drawing closer to the people, we must above all make common cause with those elements of the masses which, since the foundation of the state of Muscovy, have never ceased to protest, not only in words but in deeds, against everything directly or indirectly connected with the state, against the nobility, against the bureaucracy, the clergy, the traders, and the parasitic kulaks. We must unite with the adventurous tribes of brigands who are only genuine revolutionaries in Russia. Interesting. Like Russia is for those of you who don't know, Russia is a bit more like the United States than we often like to let on, in that they are very much a collective of various different racial and ethnic groups. And so I could see various different groups protesting, but parasitic kulaks is the one. I guess I'm getting caught up in that. Not that my ancestors were kulaks or anything. I was the kid of, I guess you'd call them landed peasants. I don't even know if they were landed peasants. On my grandma's side, she was probably, both her parents were probably peasants, unlanded peasants, because they lived near Kiev, and so I think they worked in Kiev for something. I don't think they actually worked on the farm. I'd like to say my great-grandpa was the same thing. He had to flee the country, though, because when the Red Army came a-marching in, They said, conscript or die, and he hightailed it to Greece to catch a boat the hell out of there. Family history. But anyway, continuing. This is from Nechev's 1896 article, 1869. I am not dyslexic. Catechism of a Revolutionary, which is said to have inspired Lenin. But very much unlike Nechayev or Lenin, there's also something maudlin in Rothbard's worldview, pinning for the lost world of his middle-class boyhood. New York cafeterias filled with lovable eccentrics, Rogers and Hart and Cole Porter tunes, W.C. Fields and Marx Brothers comedians in the theaters. Like so many other reactionaries, he also mourned for a world he never experienced. There's a German word for that, or is it an Irish word? There's a word for, like, I imagine it's a word in a couple different languages, but it's a longing. It's a sense of nostalgia for something you've never experienced, and a longing for a homeland you never had. That kind of thing. That feeling very much underlines the alt-right and a lot of reactionaries in general. So it's true in that sense. Like so many, he would have been 6 years old when Roosevelt was elected. He never really experienced the pre-New Deal America, or the Old Republic, as he called it. And he does not, as he wrote of Woody Allen, manage to transmute his rage and his sadness of nostalgia into the bracing and liberating joy of wit and laughter. His W.C. Fields impression is just a mean-spirited crank. There's no sublimation. That much is true. Murray, oh, look at that. Are we at the end finally? As commonly happens when you aim for and miss the sublime, Rothbard's vision ends up desolate and despairing. Does it, though? Because you're making contradictory claims here in this article, Mr. What's-Your-Face. I'll go back up and look the title later. You're saying that the political landscape is now heavily shaped and influenced by Rothbard, but at the same time you're claiming that his vision ends up desolate and despairing? Well, he wouldn't be despairing if he's gotten his way, now would he? So, he based his economic theory... Statist bullshit, indeed. He based his economic theory on the striving individual, but failing to deliver a pain to the noble soul bravely facing down conformity and cultural decline. His imagination instead reveals a world of petty grievance leavened with grand pretensions. So you're saying because he didn't get his way with his economics, because the individual couldn't be fully realized, that he was just a sad little man striking back against a mean world, something along those lines? Nah. You're making a false dichotomy here about what Rothbard believed. The pain of the individual and the striking of the individual against the state, and the tactics he suggested to do that were one and the same. There's not a separation in Murray's mind between the individual and the actions they take against the state, however that may be. He recognized the state as a legitimate form of, not of hierarchy, but a legitimate form of action to achieve libertarian ends. And so if you're trying to say that he didn't get his individualist vision, so he's just lashing out by being like, a mean alt-righter, then that's not true. The two were always one and the same. A mixture of self-pity and spite. Yeah, no, that's not the case. The spite and the self-pity, A, were never there. B, if you're going to summarize his ideologies thusly, then they were one and the same. Your separation is vastly over-exaggerated. But say this for Rothbard: even when he seemed at the very margins of American political life, he never quit. I am sure, Keynes wrote, that the power of vested interest is vastly exaggerated compared with the gradual encroachment of ideas. Today, Rothbard's ideas are merely encroaching. Aren't merely encroaching, they're on the march. I fucking wish. You might also like Did the fun work, dynasties of neoliberalism. This is a far left rag. And you know how my mom sent this to me? Great white hype. There'd be a lot of fodder in here for me to go through if I once. You know how my mom found this? It was linked to someone. It was linked to her because Jonah Goldberg liked a tweet. And she tried to play it off like, oh no, he likes Rothbard. He likes Rothbard. He likes his liberty outlook. And I'm like, no, Mom, he's a neocon. He doesn't like Rothbard. And I could tell from the title too that this wasn't going to be a fucking flattering article about Rothbard. But my parents are far too worried about my political opinions. But I'm an edgy teen. I can't help myself. But yeah, this is The Forgotten Man. The constant misunderstanding of libertarians and Rothbards is annoying, and to say it's influenced major political spheres is ridiculous. Well, it certainly has influenced the alt-right. I think they're right in that assessment of it, of course, but they're wrong in a larger sense when they say it has. They're conflating two things. They're conflating the size of the alt-right and the scope the alt-right has in modern right-wing politics, and then Murray Rothbard's influence in the alt-right. So yeah, Murray Rothbard has obviously influenced the alt-right, and he's big in that circle of the right wing, but the alt-right itself is not big. And so the idea that Murray Rothbard has, by association with the alt-right, influenced a large political sphere is completely wrong, because the political spheres that he has influenced, that mainly being libertarians of any stripe, being the normie Jeffrey Tuckerites, to, the alt-right types like James Alsop and such, and the people like who venerate Hoppe, myself included, these are all tiny fringes. The alt-right is a fringe minority. Yeah, exactly. The alt-right is a fringe minority. Libertarians in general are a fringe minority. Like, even if they're the more libertine, lulbert types of libertarians, everything Murray Rothbard has touched is a minority in political opinion. And now you might say that because he's touched such a large variety of small groups, his influence is pretty large, but that's not really true, because from the libertarians he's spoken to, touch to the alt-right folks, they're all fucking tiny. It doesn't matter. Believe me, I want there you go, there's my desktop background, Santa and puppies. No matter what Rothbard's done, it's not enough. I'd love it for it to be more, but it's not. Wait a minute, shit, was I not screen sharing that last bit? Fuck, wait a minute. Fuck, was that whole last bit? Oh, okay, no, it wasn't. All right, I'm good. I was real worried for a second that I just whatchamacallit, not showing you guys the last part of the article I was attempting to review. But yeah. I know you guys can't see chat anymore, but I'm still watching chat. So if you have any questions, what must be done? That's the question, isn't it? What must be done? IMO, fucking support Trump, support right-wing nationalists, Paul Nealon for Congress, fuck out of here, Paul Ryan, all that good stuff. And yeah, also go support your local alt-right talking head. And I say that, but no, seriously, go support James Alsop, Nick Fuentes. Go watch Braving Ruin and Jean-Francois Guerpé. and the alternative hypothesis, and who else? Who else am I going to name drop here because I've spoken with them? Who else? Oh yeah, go watch Dr. Layman because he's a funny cunt and he does good social science. Yeah. And the academic agent. No, academic agent is a cuck. I know you like him, Voltaire. He's a nice guy. Is Gerpe alt-right? No, I don't think he is. I think he's just a biologist who's enjoying shitting on the pseudoscience that Kraut's bringing up. And that's actually a good transition. Allow me to transition briefly into some drama I've inserted myself in on Twitter because I am a lowly click whore. I mean, that's not true. I have genuine opinion and thoughts on the matter, but still. So if you haven't been following what's happened on Twitter lately, Kraut and T has been trying to dox people, or if he hasn't been doxing people necessarily, he's been running smear campaigns on a whole list of different right-wing YouTubers from Aiden Paladin. It's been revealed that he actually had Aiden Paladin's docs, like her personal Twitter info and shit, on a personal account she used with like identifying stuff, which, you know, if you're someone with her views, she's not alt-right by any means, I don't think. She's kind of just a conservative, but, you know, revealing information on her would be pretty fucking shitty. And so, you know, Kraut clearly had that info. And one of the mainstays of this big debate has been that Kraut, in essence, like if you go back and look at his conversations with Braving Ruin, when Braving Ruin was Edgy Sphinx, Kraut acknowledges that there are differences in these cultures that are coming to Germany and to the West in general. And that, you know, these things are incompatible. And so that these people shouldn't be pandered to. Like, you know, Kraut doesn't want any more Muslims or people from the Middle East in his country, as does the alt-right. And so effectively, Kraut and the alt-right want the same thing. Or maybe they wanted the same thing. I don't know what Kraut wants anymore. But at this point, what's happened is Kraut's supporting the mainstay for the left and having more immigrants, which is this idea of racial equality, that all the peoples are equal, and if the only things causing, you know, these people to misbehave is socioeconomic, then you just need to fix the socioeconomic factors, and the only way that's done is through a welfare state. And I think Kraut's support for the welfare state came first. You can go back and watch his old videos, and he's always been a lefty good boy. So I think his left opinions kind of led him to this racial egalitarian nonsense. But, you know, he used to be someone who was very much against, you know, the idea of these immigrants coming to his country and changing the law and changing the culture. But he's supporting the mainstay premise of why these people continue to bring these people in. Because it's like, oh, we'll just change their socioeconomic situation and they'll adapt to the culture, even though that's been provably failing to happen. Like, Kraut's done the research on this, or at least Braving Ruin did when he was Edgy Sphinx, and he shared it with Kraut. So Kraut knows what's happening to his country, and Kraut knows why it's happening because of these differences. But if he denies where the differences are coming from, then he really doesn't have a leg to stand on with what's happening to his country. It's a rather odd situation. Lol, even Sargon of Akkad disapproves of Kraut. Yeah, no, I saw the fact that he was done with the Kraut drama. I was, you know, that restored some of my hope in Sargon, because honestly, with some of his opinions on the alt-right, like the video he made on the Thinkery about Braving Ruin, supposedly moral fagging, was stupid. So I'm happy to see that, you know, he's come out. He's actually taken down his mirror of Kraut's video, because people were, when JF's video got flagged out of existence, people were asking Sargon, oh, are you going to mirror JF's video? Come on, you got to support free speech, mirror JF's video. And he decided not to. He decided to uninvolve himself, which I think, you know, he wasn't too involved to begin with, so that's not too much of a feat for him, and I respect him for doing so. Whoop. All right, I think I'm good now. But yeah, like I said, Kraut is supporting the mainstay principle of his own demise. And I respect Sargon for backing out of it. And also another problem with neocons interventionists, they failed to see the long-term consequences. Yeah, that's true, but it's always been the folly of their foreign policy, I suppose. Yeah, I pretty much said my piece on all of it. Yeah, so that's review of the article. The hell what's its name? On this website, The Baffler, The Forgotten Man, on Murray Rothbard, Philosophical Harbinger of Trump and the alt-right. And go, I guess, show some love to the people over at The Baffler. Why not? Seems like an interesting little leftist piece of propaganda and all that good boy shit. But yeah, another stream in the works coming up soon. I'm going to be doing more housekeeping than I did here. Going to be a little review of some critical theory and stuff like that, and then after that, planning on picking up research where I left off with the ethnocentrism and identity politics, because apparently Braving Ruin isn't doing a video on that, which is why I actually stopped. I thought he was going to do a video on that and he was going to cover it better than I ever could. So I was like, fuck it, I won't even bother. But he didn't, and so I'm going to pick up there. And I also have some research collected for a video on, well, multiple videos on time preference and multiple videos on ethnocentrism and identity politics. So I have the research, I just need to fucking read it now, because sociology is fun. I'm going to do one eventually. The whole Kraut thing has set me back a lot. Oh, what's up, Braving? Sure. If you want one, if you want any of my research, dude, I'm happy to give you access to it. I know I only posted like 3 links in in your Discord a while ago on the ethnocentric tendencies and ethnocentrism as a viable evolutionary strategy. But I'm happy to share some of the research I've done with you also. We can talk over Discord and shit. So no worries there, but yeah. Thanks for tuning in. I'm sorry you kind of caught this at the end of the whole thing, Braving. But I'm probably going to be chilling like a villain up for a little bit longer. And so, yeah, thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. More to come in the future. And I'm going to do a shitty layman impression to end this thing. So forgive me. And as always, Babylon prevails. I hate myself.